My husband divorced me with the coldest words I had ever heard. I don't want this child. I don't want this life. We're done. He walked away, leaving me pregnant and broken. For weeks, I drowned in heartbreak, believing it was about fear, about responsibility, about fatherhood. But then the cracks began to show. One night, the phone rang. A voice I didn't recognize whispered, "He didn't leave you because of the child. He left because of what you almost found." Then the line went dead. At first, I thought it was a cruel prank. But those words gnawed at me until I couldn't ignore them. What had I almost found? A few days later, I went into the attic, searching for baby clothes I had tucked away years ago. That's when I saw it, a dusty box shoved deep into the insulation. The box was heavier than it looked like it carried the weight of secrets I was never meant to see. My fingers trembled as I peeled back the brittle tape. The smell of dust and something older, something hidden, hit me all at once. Inside were passports. Not one, not two, but a stack of them, all with his face, all under different names. My chest tightened with every page I flipped. One claimed he was from Germany. Another said Canada. Another bore the stamp of a country he'd never even mentioned. Yet every single one carried my husband's photos, the man who had stood in front of me and said he didn't want this life. Beneath them were birth certificates with different dates, different places. Driver's licenses, too, each one carefully designed, as if he had been building entire lives I never knew about. And then, at the bottom, the clippings. Old newspaper clippings, yellowed and brittle, their headlines screaming louder than the silence in the attic. Fraud case shakes city. Missing suspect vanishes after trial. Authorities still searching. My eyes skimmed one more line before everything inside me froze. Because in the grainy black and white photo, standing in a courtroom, face blurred by time, was my husband. The man I thought I knew had never even existed. And that was when it hit me, the phone call wasn't a prank. It was a warning. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe button and tell me in the comments, what would you do in this situation? The attic was quiet, but my mind raced. I sat clutching those yellowed clippings, my breath shallow, my pulse hammering. For the first time, I was not just thinking about heartbreak. I was thinking about survival. If that phone call was not a prank but a warning, then someone out there knew what I had found. Someone was watching me. That night, the house felt different. Every creak in the walls sounded like a footstep. Every shadow stretched too long across the curtains. Even the hum of passing cars felt like eyes pressing against the glass. What used to be my safe place now felt like a stage, and I was standing in the center of it under a spotlight I could not see. Then the phone rang again. My chest tightened. I stared at it, my hand trembling above the receiver. One ring.
2.
3. On the fourth, I forced myself to answer. The same voice returned.
Come.
Almost amused. He knows you found the attic. And he is watching you. The line went dead. I gripped the phone until my knuckles ached. My husband was not just gone. He was not just a liar. He was out there, close enough to know my every move. Close enough to know I had touched his secrets. I was no longer abandoned. I was being hunted. Sleep was impossible. I paced the house from window to window, checking locks, pulling curtains tight. The silence of the rooms pressed in like a warning. I rested my hands on my stomach, the baby shifting inside me, reminding me that I was not only protecting myself anymore. I whispered into the dark, promising the child I carried, "I will not let him destroy you." By morning, my fear hardened into something sharper. If I was being watched, I would fight with silence and strategy. I copied every passport, every certificate, every clipping. I made sure they were not all hidden in one place. Some I locked away in safe spots, others I slipped to people he would never suspect. If he thought he could erase his trail, he was wrong. I was already preserving it. That afternoon, I made my next move. I reached out to the reporter, whose name appeared on the clippings. Meeting him in person was like stepping into another world. His eyes widened when he saw the documents spread out on the table between us. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages. His voice dropped low as though the walls themselves were listening. "You do not know what you have uncovered," he whispered. He was supposed to be gone. Some even believed he was dead. No one thought he would ever risk showing his face again. But he had. He had built a new identity, a new life, a new mask. And he had done it all by standing right beside me. The days that followed blurred together. Headlines erupted across screens. Old trial footage replayed on television, filling my living room with images of a man who suddenly felt like a stranger. The missing suspect was not missing anymore. He was my husband. He was the father of my child. And yet, even as his name resurfaced in the news and whispers spread like wildfire, I knew the story was far from over. If the caller was right, then he was already aware of what I had seen. He knew I had touched the box, read the papers, and connected the dots. The truth hit me like a second betrayal. He was not just hiding from the world. He was waiting, watching, planning. That phone call was not just a warning. It was the beginning of the game. I left the reporter's office that evening with more than just copies of papers. I left with a new understanding. This was bigger than me, bigger than my marriage. I was holding the kind of truth that could not stay buried forever. On the train home, I kept replaying his words. He's been untouchable for years until now. That sentence was a spark. It made my fear shift into strategy. I was no longer just a pregnant woman abandoned by her husband. I was holding a weapon that could collapse everything he had built on lies. That night, instead of crying, I spread the documents across my kitchen table. Every passport, every certificate, every clipping. I studied them like pieces of a puzzle. My hands shook, but my mind was sharper than ever. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had power. But power can be dangerous. I knew I could not make one wrong move. If I went to the police too quickly, he might slip away again. If I told the wrong person, he might find out and silence me. So, I decided on something different. Patience. Every evening, after work, I returned to the table. I created files, timelines, maps. I traced every city listed in his fake passports, every address connected to his old IDs. I even marked out connections to businesses that appeared legitimate, but felt wrong when I looked closer. And slowly, the picture started to change. My husband had not only built a new name for himself, he had built a network. Fake companies, shell accounts, associates whose names meant nothing to me, but everything to the crimes in those articles. The reporter called me 2 days later. His voice was low, cautious. "Listen," he said. "I shared pieces of this with someone I trust. They told me your husband's file is tied to more than just fraud. Money laundering, trafficking, things that don't stay in courtrooms, things that make people disappear." The words made my stomach turn. Suddenly, the creaks in my house, the feeling of being watched, the phone calls, they all made sense. He wasn't just afraid of being caught. He was afraid I would expose the kind of secrets that could ruin more than his name. But instead of breaking me, the thought lit a fire. If he thought fear would keep me quiet, he was wrong. I began planting traps. Quiet, invisible ones. I placed duplicate copies of the documents with people he would never suspect. A trusted neighbor, a childhood friend he had never met. I even mailed one to a P.O. box under a fake name I created. If anything ever happened to me, those files would surface. He would never be able to erase them all. And while I built my safety net, I built something else too, a mask. In public, I smiled. At work, I laughed. To my family, I said I was fine. I let everyone believe I was healing, that I was moving on. But in reality, every smile hid a plan. Every laugh covered a strategy. I was teaching myself the art of silence, the same silence he had once used to hide from the world. The reporter met me again a week later. His eyes looked more tired than before. He leaned close and said, "There are people who will want this buried. People more dangerous than your husband. If you want to move forward, you need more than evidence. You need a moment. The right stage. The right eyes watching." A moment. Those words echoed in my head for days. And then, one night, it clicked. My husband was not a man who would vanish quietly. He was proud. He was arrogant. He loved attention. If he came back, it would not be in shadows. It would be in the spotlight. That was when I decided. I would not chase him. I would not run. I would wait for him to step into the light he craved, and then I would make sure that same light burned him alive. The plan was dangerous. It meant pretending I knew less than I did. It meant staying calm while the fear crawled inside my skin. It meant waiting for a man who was already watching me, maybe even closer than I realized. But I had something he didn't: time. He thought I was weak. He thought silence meant defeat. But silence was my weapon, and patience was the blade I would sharpen until the moment was right. The last time the reporter called me, his voice carried something I had not heard before: fear. "Be careful," he warned. "If your husband knows you're building this case, he won't just come after you. He'll try to erase everything: your name, your child, your life. These men don't forgive betrayal." I thanked him, but my decision was already made. My husband had chosen betrayal long before I ever did. And if he thought I was going to let him walk away again, he was wrong. That night, I stood at the attic door once more. I looked at the empty space where the box had been, and I whispered into the darkness, "You thought I was just your wife. You thought I was your secret. But now, I am your end." What he didn't know was that his story was no longer his to control. It was mine, and I was writing the chapter that would finish him. It started small: whispers on news blogs, half-buried headlines tucked between politics and sports. But within days, the whispers grew into a roar. His name was everywhere. TV anchors repeated the same words over and over: fugitive found, living in disguise, years on the run. The face I had once kissed goodnight now stared back at me from every screen, every front page. But he wasn't described as a husband anymore. He was a liar, a fraud, a missing suspect whose name had haunted case files for years. The world now knew what I had discovered in that attic. My husband was not who he claimed to be. He was a man who had built an entire life out of shadows, and I was the one who had pulled the mask away. The reporter's story spread like wildfire. Commentators argued about how he had evaded capture for so long. Neighbors I barely knew suddenly sent messages, pretending to care but really desperate for gossip. My phone buzzed constantly, but none of that mattered, because I knew something none of them did. It was only a matter of time before he came back. I didn't have to wait long. 3 nights after the story broke, the knock came. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like thunder. My baby stirred in my arms, whimpering. I froze, heart pounding, every muscle screaming at me not to answer. But some instinct stronger than fear pulled me to the door. And there he was. Not the confident man who once wore tailored suits. Not the husband who smirked when he thought he was winning. What stood on my porch was something smaller, weaker, desperate. His hair was messy, his eyes wild. His hands shook as he reached toward me. "Please," he begged, voice hoarse. "You don't understand. If they take me, they won't stop with me. They'll come for you. For us." The words should have frightened me. Maybe once they would have. But standing there with my child in my arms, I felt nothing but cold clarity. This wasn't love. This wasn't protection. This was manipulation, the same trick he had used to build his entire life. I stared at him, steady and unblinking, and whispered the words I had carried for weeks. "You should have thought of that before you built your life on lies." His face cracked. For the first time, he realized the control he once had over me was gone. Then, from behind me, the flash of lights filled the windows. Cameras. Reporters. Police. The trap was set. The same reporter who had broken the story had promised me one thing: when the time came, the world would see the truth with their own eyes. And now, here it was. The officers moved fast. Boots thudded against the floor, shouts filled the air, and my living room turned into the stage of his downfall. He tried to run, but his legs betrayed him. He stumbled, clinging to the doorway like it might save him. "Wait, please." "She's lying. She set me up." His voice cracked, desperation spilling into the night. But no one listened. The police pinned him down, cuffs snapping shut with finality. The cameras caught everything: his wild eyes, his trembling hands, the last fragments of his mask falling apart in front of the world. He turned toward me, his face pale, his lips trembling. "You destroyed me," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos. I stepped closer, holding my baby tight, and answered with the only truth that mattered. "No. You destroyed yourself. I just showed the world." For a moment, everything stopped. His eyes widened, his chest rose and fell in short, shallow breaths, and then the fight drained from him. The man who once believed he was untouchable was finally cornered, finally seen for what he truly was. But as the officers dragged him away, I felt something twist inside me. Relief, yes, but not peace. Because even as the cameras flashed and reporters shouted, I noticed something strange. On his wrist, hidden under the sleeve of his shirt, was a mark I had never seen before. A tattoo, faded and jagged, just 3 letters. When the light hit it, I realized they weren't random. They matched the words scrawled on the back of that photograph I had found. Brothers. My stomach dropped. This wasn't over. That single detail told me what the anonymous letter had warned. He wasn't alone. There were others out there, men connected to his past, men who would notice the moment he fell. And if the headlines had exposed him, they had also exposed me. The night he was taken away, I sat in my quiet living room, holding my child close. Outside, the reporters finally left, their cameras packed up. Inside, the silence returned, but it was heavier now. Because while the world thought the story was over, I knew better. His mask had shattered, yes. His lies had collapsed, yes. But somewhere beyond the cameras, beyond the courtroom, others were waiting. And they knew my name. The exposure was just the beginning. They dragged him out of my house in handcuffs. Flashbulbs cracked the night, turning the street into a storm of white light. Each click of the camera felt like another nail in his coffin. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, some whispering, some clutching their children closer. The man they once saw as charming, successful, and untouchable was now nothing more than a prisoner being shoved into the back of a police car. As the officers tightened their grip, he turned toward me. His lips moved like they weighed 100 pounds. "You destroyed me," he whispered, voice breaking under the weight of his own downfall. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I stood rooted in place, my child in my arms, and answered with words I had been carrying inside me for months. "You destroyed yourself. I just showed the world." For a moment, our eyes locked. Gone was the arrogance, the smirk, the false charm. What I saw instead was fear. The kind of fear that belongs to a man who has lived too long behind lies and finally realizes the walls are closing in. I thought that moment would be the end. That once the cuffs clicked, the story would be over. But a man like him does not fall cleanly. His lies had spread too far, his roots dug too deep. The trial began, and with it chaos. Headlines screamed every day, each one louder than the last. Reporters uncovered scams, betrayals, and crimes that stretched far beyond our marriage. People couldn't get enough of the story. The double life, the hidden past, the fugitive husband living under a false name. The world consumed it like a movie, except I was trapped inside it. At first, I felt justice in every headline. Every betrayal I had buried in silence was finally dragged into the light. But then the letters started. The first one arrived folded inside a plain envelope. No name, no return address. Just a single sentence scrawled in messy handwriting. "You think you've won, but you've only started the war." I told myself it was a sick prank, maybe from someone obsessed with the trial. But the second letter made my stomach twist. It wasn't words this time. It was a photo. My wedding day. His hand circled in red ink, highlighting the faint tattoo I had always brushed off as meaningless. On the back of the photo, one word was written: brothers. The tattoo had haunted me since the day of his arrest, but I never dared to ask. Now I understood. He wasn't alone. His secrets weren't just his, they belonged to something bigger. And if the letters were right, they hadn't forgotten about him. Or me. Court was worse. The prosecutor presented the evidence: forged passports, offshore accounts, fake identities, stolen money. Piece by piece, his empire of lies was dismantled. And then my heart stopped. Some of the documents bore my name, my signature, my supposed approval. Gasps filled the courtroom as people turned to stare at me. In that instant, I felt the trap snap shut. Even in his downfall, he had made sure I was tangled in the wreckage. For one sleepless night, I believed it might work, that I would be dragged down alongside him, that the world would brand me guilty by association. I held my baby close and imagined the unthinkable: prison bars, headlines with my face, my child growing up alone. But then, the cracks in his plan showed. The reporter I had trusted stepped forward, revealing the files I had copied before his arrest. His mistress testified, her voice shaking as she admitted she helped record him bragging about making me his scapegoat. Piece by piece, the trap collapsed under its own weight. The truth cut through the lies, and with every revelation, his smirk grew thinner. Still, he tried. One afternoon, during a break in court, he leaned forward just far enough for me to hear. "You'll never be free of me," he hissed. "Not even in prison." It was the last smirk I would ever see from him. The jury returned faster than anyone expected. Guilty. Fraud. Identity theft. Conspiracy. Crimes stacked so high that the judge's voice carried like thunder when he delivered the sentence. "You built your life on lies. Now you will spend your life behind walls." The gavel fell, and the weight of those words echoed louder than the reporters outside. The world celebrated his arrest. The cameras hailed me as the woman who had uncovered the truth. But as he was led away, I knew something no one else in that room understood. His downfall wasn't the end. His secrets had branches, and those branches reached into places I couldn't yet see. His empire was gone, but his shadow was still alive. And if the letters were true, that shadow was coming for me. The night after the verdict, the house felt too quiet. No reporters outside. No police lights flashing. Just silence. I should have felt peace, but instead, every creak in the floorboards made my chest tighten. I couldn't stop thinking about the letters. About the photo, with his tattoo circled in red. About that single word, brothers. I told myself it was over. That he was gone. Locked away. Powerless. But deep down, I knew better. A man like him doesn't build lies that big alone. He had help. He had allies. And allies don't vanish just because he was caught. A week later, the first sign came. I woke up to find my front gate open. I was sure I had locked it. My heart pounded as I walked outside. There, nailed to the wooden post, was another envelope. No stamp. No address. Just my name, written in the same jagged handwriting as before. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, 5 words. "His debt is now yours." I felt the world tilt. My baby stirred in my arms as if sensing the shift. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. What debt? Who were they? And what did they want from me? That evening, I called the reporter. He came over, his expression grim as he read the note. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Your husband was part of something larger. The trial showed us the crimes, but it didn't touch the network behind them." He paused, then added, "The brothers." The name made my skin crawl. It sounded less like a group and more like a shadow, faceless, nameless, impossible to pin down. The reporter told me they weren't just criminals. They were powerful, organized, and ruthless. "If they've marked you," he warned, "you need to be careful. They don't forgive. They don't forget." I wanted to scream. To ask why I had to carry his sins when I had already carried his betrayal. But instead, I nodded, clutching my child tighter. My fight wasn't over. It had only changed shape. Days later, more signs appeared. A black car parked outside the house for hours, engine running, windows tinted so dark I couldn't see who sat inside. Anonymous calls came at night, nothing but silence on the other end. Once, I found muddy footprints by my back door, leading nowhere. The walls of my home, once a refuge, now felt like a cage. I refused to break. If he thought I would crumble, he had underestimated me again. Just like he had before. I began documenting everything: license plates, calls, notes. I reached out to the authorities, but they shrugged, telling me without proof, there was little they could do. Proof. That word again. It was always proof that saved me, and I would need it now more than ever. Then came the moment that shattered the illusion of safety completely. I was rocking my baby to sleep when the lights flickered and went out. The house plunged into darkness. My breath caught as I heard it. Footsteps in the yard, slow, deliberate, circling the house. I grabbed my phone, fingers shaking, and dialed the reporter. Before I could speak, his voice cut through the static. I know. They're already inside. My blood turned to ice. How did he know? Was he warning me, or was he part of it all along? I pressed my back against the nursery wall, heart hammering, the sound of the footsteps now moving closer to the window. My baby whimpered in my arms, and I whispered a prayer I hadn't said in years. Then, just as suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in heavy and unbearable. Minutes felt like hours before the power flickered back on. When I rushed outside, the yard was empty. No footprints. No car. Nothing. But taped to the window was another message. This one written in thick, red ink. You're already in the game. I stood there trembling, the baby pressed to my chest, and realized something terrifying. My husband's downfall wasn't the end of the story. It was only the opening act. The brothers weren't after him anymore. They were after me. And I had two choices: run and live in fear, or step into the shadows and fight them the way I had fought him. As I locked the doors that night, one thought carved itself deep into my mind. He may have destroyed himself, but his past was reaching for me now. And if the brothers thought I would be an easy target, they were about to learn the same lesson he did. Because I don't just survive betrayal. I turn it into war. The night after the message, I couldn't close my eyes. Every creak of the house felt like a warning. Every shadow on the wall looked like a threat. I knew then that I was no longer just cleaning up the wreckage of my husband's lies. I was stepping into something much larger, darker, and more dangerous. The brothers had marked me. And I understood one thing clearly. Fear wouldn't protect me. Silence had been my armor with him, but now silence could kill me. The next morning, I walked into the newsroom with the box of evidence clutched to my chest. Reporters swarmed, cameras clicked, but I only trusted one face, the man who had first whispered the truth. Yet his words from the night before still echoed. They're already inside. I didn't know if he was warning me or playing me, but I handed him the files anyway. Not because I trusted him, but because I wanted the world to see. If the brothers thrived in shadows, then I would drag them into the light, one secret at a time. As the story broke, it spread faster than wildfire. Anonymous voices flooded in with tips. Whistleblowers crawled out of hiding. The empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. But with every headline, every broadcast, I felt the target on my back grow sharper. One night, a black car followed me for miles. Another, I found a note slid under my door. Stop, or the baby is next. I didn't break. I didn't run. I went to the attic again, the same place where this all began, and turned it into my war room. Documents, maps, photographs plastered across the walls. Every name, every account, every string of the web laid bare. They had tried to turn me into prey, but instead, I became the hunter. And when the next phone call came, I didn't tremble. I answered with a steady voice. I know you're watching, I said. But you should know something. He underestimated me too. And now he's gone. Do you really want to make the same mistake? There was silence on the line. Then a low laugh. And finally, for words that sent a shiver down my spine. Welcome to the war. The line went dead, but this time I didn't feel fear. I felt fire. Because I realized something powerful that night. His downfall was never the end of my story. It was only the beginning of theirs. And if the brothers wanted a war, then I would give them one they would never forget. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Your next journey is just a click away.